Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are plunging into a stack of sources about a figure whose words have shaped the imaginations and faith of millions. C.S. Lewis.
That's right. A fascinating character.
You sent us articles, excerpts, notes, and our mission is really to unpack them. We want to go on a journey through Lewis's early life, understand the, surprising path of his conversion to Christianity,
Yeah, definitely wasn't straightforward.
and explore the profound impact his life had and honestly continues to have for so many people. Think of this as your shortcut to understanding the man behind Narnia and mere Christianity.
Our goal is to pull out the most important nuggets, those fascinating details, and maybe some surprising facts that show not just what he thought, but why it might still matter to you today. We'll try to present it like a story unfolding.
Exactly. Ready? Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
So C.S. Lewis, or Jack, as pretty much everyone called him, was born in Belfast, 1898, Protestant family. His own description, I think it's from Surprised by Joy, was that their faith was kind of,
Bland, Anglican, something like that. Not exactly fiery.
right, bland. But he looked back on his earliest childhood pretty fondly, actually. He remembered blessings like good parents, good food, and a garden large enough to play in.
Sounds nice.
Mm.
And there was his nurse, Lizzie Endicott. He spoke so highly of her, saying she was as simply good as a human could be. A real anchor, it seems.
And the house itself sounds amazing, just packed with books everywhere.
Oh, yeah. That clearly instilled a lifelong love of reading, everything from serious stuff to what he called lowbrow things. He basically became a natural library dweller.
You can see the seeds of the scholar right there. He later said Oxford's Bodleian Library was one of his favorite places.
Absolutely. But that fairly idyllic start, it got hit hard when his mother died. He was still pretty young.
Yeah, that must have been devastating. The sources say he prayed really desperately for her to get better, but she didn't.
She died. And what's interesting, like you said, is how he reflected on it later.
Right, he insisted it wasn't some big religious crisis for him at that moment.
Yeah, he felt the kind of belief behind that desperate childhood prayer was, and this is a weird phrase, too irreligious for its failure to matter religiously to him then.
What does that even mean, too irreligious? Like too transactional?
I think so. Like a childish bargain. God, do this and I'll believe. When it failed, the flimsy foundation just collapsed without really touching his deeper worldview yet. He saw it as having no religious importance in retrospect.
That's a really nuanced take on childhood grief and faith.
It is. And things changed a lot after that. He got shipped off to boarding school, and honestly, these years sound pretty grim.
Especially the first one, Wynyard.
Oh, yeah. Run by this headmaster, Oldie Capron, described as autocratic, and apparently he eventually went insane and was prosecuted for cruelty.
Wow. Lewis tells stories like Cabron flogging a kid for a geometry mistake, hating another just because his dad was a dentist.
Just bizarre and cruel. Lewis said it was like living permanently in a large railway station. Zero solitude, just constant noise and, well, misery.
Sounds absolutely soul-crushing.
Totally. But here's a twist from the sources, something really surprising. Lewis actually says that it was there, at Wynyard, amidst all that hardship, that he became an effective believer.
Wait, really? In that miserable place?
Yeah. He kind of suggests that the sheer difficulty, the stripping away of comfort, maybe made him receptive in a way the dry husks of religion back home hadn't. It wasn't because of the cruelty, obviously, but maybe the intensity of the experience broke something open.
That's deeply counterintuitive. Usually you'd think that leads to bitterness or rejection of faith.
Right. It shows how unpredictable these things can be. After Wynyard, he went to Campbell College, which sounds socially different, more mixed with farmers' sons and such.
But his dad pulled him out, didn't he? Maybe Jack wasn't becoming the proper English gentleman he hoped for.
Seems likely. So he was tutored at home for a bit, and then came Malvern College, and that's where he says he completely lost his faith.
And felt relief.
Yeah, oh, the relief of it, is how he put it. And this is where he got exposed to things like spiritualism, which he called higher thought.
Okay, what exactly was higher thought? Sounds a bit vague.
It was sort of a mishmash, really. Mysticism, bits of occultism, some Eastern ideas floating around them. The appeal, Lewis said, was that there was nothing to be obeyed and nothing to be believed except what was either comforting or exciting.
Ah, so it offered thrills and maybe a sense of secret knowledge.
Exactly. He mentioned the appeal of occult knowledge being part of the we few who are in the know. It felt special, evocative.
Without any real moral demands or hard doctrines to wrestle with.
Precisely. Looking back, though, he felt he was genuinely in danger then. He said if he'd met the wrong kind of person dabbling seriously in the occult, he might have become a Satanist or a maniac.
Whoa. So he went from bland faith to finding belief in misery, then ditching it with relief for something exciting but potentially dangerous. Definitely not a straight path.
Not even close.
So what brought him back towards Christianity? What were the next steps?
Well, even before Malvern, his atheism was already pretty well formed, and it got a huge boost when he went to study with his private tutor, W.T. Kirkpatrick.
The Great Knock. Love that nickname. What was he like?
Kirk was a staunch atheist, a rationalist in the strictest sense.
Meaning, like, reason is the only path to truth. Forget faith.
Pretty much, influenced by people like Fraser, who wrote The Golden Bough About Myths, and the philosopher Schopenhauer.
Schopenhauer. Wasn't he the really pessimistic one? All about suffering and pointless will?
That's him. Saw misery and disorder as proof against a good God. Believed we're just slaves to desire, leading to constant suffering. So Kirk had this very logical, materialist, atheistic worldview.
Did he actively try to deconvert Lewis?
Lewis says no, Kirk never directly attacked religion in front of him, which is interesting. But Kirk's relentless logic, his demand for evidence and clear thinking on everything, gave Lewis fresh ammunition for the atheism he already had.
So Kirk sharpened his skeptical tools, basically.
Exactly. And Lewis always credited Kirk hugely for teaching him how to argue and think rigorously, even though they ended up poles apart philosophically. He spoke of his very great debt and undiminished reverence for Kirk.
That's quite something. And Lewis's own outlook was already pretty bleak anyway, right? Feeling the universe was menacing and unfriendly.
Yeah, partly from reading early popular science about the vastness and coldness of space. He felt dwarfed and insignificant.
And his school experiences probably didn't help. Believing adult life was just this unremitting struggle.
Right. He summed it up grimly. Term, holidays.
Yep.
Then work, work, work till we die. Cheery stuff.
Really paints a picture. Yet, amidst all this gloom and hardcore atheism, he kept having these odd experiences he called joy.
Yes. This intense, inconsolable longing. Not happiness, something deeper, almost painful, but desirable. He first felt it reading Beatrix Potter, of all things.
Squirrel Nutkin, seriously.
Yep. Encountering the idea of autumn through that story sparked it. Initially, he thought the joy was the thing that caused it, certain books, landscapes, later maybe romantic feelings.
So he was chasing the feeling itself, the thrill.
For a while, yes. But eventually, he had this huge realization. He was mistaking the experience within him for the thing the experience was pointing to.
So the joy wasn't the destination, it was a signpost.
Exactly. He realized it wasn't just a state of his own mind. It was a desire pointing outside himself to something other and outer, something real, external that he longed for, and the feeling was only a reminder.
That's a massive insight, that our deep longings might actually connect us to something real beyond ourselves. It really pushes back against the idea that feelings are just feelings. It asks you, the listener, what is your longing pointing towards?
It's a profound question. Another really key moment came when he read George MacDonald's fantasy novel, Fantastes. He said he bought it almost unwillingly.
And this fantasy book, it changed things. How?
He said it baptized his imagination, didn't convince his intellect right away, didn't change his behavior, but it gave him this sense of cool morning innocence, even a feeling of good death.
Yeah.
It showed him a bright shadow falling from the book onto the real world, making ordinary things seem transformed, numinous.
So it wasn't arguing him into belief, it was making his imagination capable of seeing differently. Priming the pump, maybe.
Exactly. It bypassed his rational defenses and spoke to a deeper level. Which makes total sense for the guy who later wrote Narnia, right? Using story to convey truth.
Definitely. So fast forward, he fights in World War I, comes back to Oxford, starts hanging out with more Christians, Owen Barfield, Tolkien.
Right. And then comes another shattering impact, as he called it. This time from his old atheist tutor, Kirk.
No way! What happened?
Kirk, the ultimate rationalist, was talking about mythology and apparently just casually remarked something like, the story of Christ. It almost looks as if it had really happened once.
Kirk said that, the Great Knock.
Can you imagine Lewis's reaction? He was floored. He thought, if even the cynic of cynics, if even Kirk isn't safe from that thought, where can I turn? His own certainty started to crumble.
Wow. The irony is incredible. The atheist tutor unintentionally planting a seed of doubt in Lewis's atheism.
Isn't it? Then came this quieter, but maybe even more decisive moment. He was on a bus going up Headington Hill near Oxford.
What happened on the bus?
He just felt this intense awareness. like he was constantly holding something at bay or wearing armor, shutting something out, and he felt he was being given a totally free choice. Open the door or keep it shut.
And he said it felt unemotional for such a huge choice.
Strangely unemotional, yeah. No big desires or fears pushing him, but he somehow felt he couldn't choose to keep the door shut anymore. So he chose to unbuckle, to just let go of the resistance.
He called it one of the freest acts of his life.
Yeah, nearer to being a perfectly free act than most that I have ever done. A surrender, really. Not forced by argument, just yielding.
That's fascinating, a quiet, internal yielding. But the final piece, the intellectual understanding, that clicked later, right, with Tolkien and Hugo Dyson.
Yes, that famous late-night conversation, October 18th, 1931, probably over some drinks. They talked for hours about myth and reality.
And what was a key idea?
They explained that pagan myths, the stories Lewis loved, weren't just lies. They were like fragments of truth, God expressing himself through the minds of poets, scattered glimpses. But the story of Christ, they argued, was different. It was a myth working on us in the same way as the others, but with this tremendous difference that it really happened.
The true myth. The myth that became fact.
Precisely. That conversation, Lewis said, made all the difference. It showed him the real nature of myth and how the gospel story fit in, not just another story, but the one where the pattern became historically real. He said he became a Christian partly by learning to read a story the right way.
It wasn't just about winning an argument, but seeing the coherence of it all.
And feeling, as he put it, decided upon by God. Like God saying, okay, put down your intellectual weapons, let's talk.
Such a powerful image. But this conversion, it caused some ripples in his personal life, didn't it? Particularly with Mrs. Moore.
Oh yeah, Minto, as he called her. That was a very complicated relationship. He'd promised her son Paddy during the war that he'd look after her if Paddy died. Paddy did die. And Lewis kept that promise for decades, living with her and her daughter Maureen.
And his conversion created friction.
Big time. His newfound commitment to church, his faith, apparently caused what he later called fiendishness in her. He created real tension. He actually explored that dynamic, how a convert's new love for God can clash with existing family ties in his later novel, Till We Have Faces.
Wow. So after this incredible winding journey, Belfast, bad schools, atheism, Joy, MacDonald, Kirk, Tolkien, the bus ride, how did Lewis actually live out this faith? What was the impact?
Well, outwardly, his life gained a certain stability. He, his brother Warnie, and Mrs. Moore bought a house, the Kilns, near Oxford. He'd be at Magdalen College during the week, then home at the Kilns on weekends, gardening, caring for Mrs. Moore.
And his brother Warnie came back to faith too, right?
Yeah, around the same time, yeah. They started attending church together regularly. And Lewis really committed himself to explaining and defending what he famously called mere Christianity.
What did he mean by mere, just the basics?
Exactly. The core foundational beliefs, ancient and orthodox doctrines, that he felt were common ground for basically all baptized and communicating Christians. Catholics, Protestants, Orthodox, the essentials they shared.
So he wasn't trying to push one denomination.
No, quite the opposite. He intentionally had people from different backgrounds read his drafts to make sure he wasn't being sectarian. He wanted to focus on the central truths. He refused to get involved in the arguments between different Christian groups.
But he wasn't shy about criticizing other movements within Christianity, was he?
Not at all. He had very strong words for efforts to liberalize or demythologize the faith.
What did that look like back then, people trying to remove the supernatural bits?
Often, yes. Reinterpreting miracles, the resurrection, the divinity of Christ as purely symbolic or ethical teachings. Lewis saw this as gutting Christianity of its power. He called it Christianity in water.
Christianity in water. He definitely had a way with words.
They did. He also called them boys' philosophies. He felt these attempts to make Christianity more palatable actually made it less compelling and led to decline, paradoxically making the liberals more hostile to traditional faith.
Interesting observation. Going back to his personal life, the sources mention that caring for Mrs. Moore was incredibly demanding, a mysterious self-imposed slavery.
It really was. She became more ill and difficult as she aged, and it took a huge toll on his time and energy. He had to turn down lots of invitations, travel opportunities. His brother Warnie felt she was basically draining Lewis's life away.
But others saw affection there too.
Yeah, friends like Owen Barfield saw genuine tenderness. Lewis himself, after her death, admitted feeling relief, but also missed her profoundly. He even once called her the first woman he fell in love with. It was deeply complex. Duty, affection, burden, all mixed together.
And academically, he was brilliant, right? A triple first at Oxford.
Just stellar. Taught philosophy briefly, then became a fellow and tutor in English literature at Magdalen College for nearly 30 years, known as a tough but fantastic tutor.
And his scholarly books, like The Allegory of Love, they were a big deal.
Hugely influential. It practically revived the field of historical criticism for medieval and Renaissance literature, and it really showed his interest in what you might call baptizing pagan themes, finding the echoes of truth in pre-Christian thought, and showing how Christianity fulfills them.
That idea, again, Christianity completing, not just canceling older truths.
Exactly. But despite all this, Oxford famously never gave him a professorship.
Why not? Was it jealousy? Or did they look down on his popular stuff?
Probably a bit of both. Many traditional dons seemed to disapprove of his apologetics, his BBC radio talks, the Narnia books. They saw it as not quite proper for a serious academic.
So Cambridge snapped him up instead.
They did. They created a prestigious chair for him in medieval and Renaissance literature in 1954. He moved there and humorously called himself an old Western man, sort of a dinosaur representing a fading worldview.
So after converting, his writing really shifted gear. Less poetry.
Yeah, the poetry got faint praise, as he put it. He poured his energy into apologetics, fiction, and that literary scholarship. The apologetics, the problem of pain, mere Christianity, miracles aimed to make faith intellectually credible for ordinary people.
Using arguments like the moral law, or pain being God's megaphone.
Exactly, trying to show reason pointed towards God and that even suffering could have a purpose, however difficult.
Ideas people still wrestle with today. That megaphone concept is powerful, even if challenging.
Absolutely. But his fiction reached even wider audiences. The Screwtape Letters was a massive hit.
The devil's perspective on temptation. So clever.
Incredibly insightful about human psychology and spiritual pitfalls. Lewis actually found it unpleasant to write having to think like a devil all day, but felt it was necessary work.
And then, Narnia.
The Chronicles of Narnia. Still globally beloved. He said they started with mental pictures, a fawn in the snow, a queen on a sledge, but they really took shape when Aslan came bounding into it.
Aslan as the Christ figure of that world.
Right. And Lewis was very clear about why he wrote them. To steal past those watchful dragons.
The dragons being
People's built-up defenses and prejudices against Christianity, often from dull or negative experiences, stained glass and Sunday school associations, he called them. He wanted to present the core truths in a fresh, imaginative, mythical way that could bypass those defenses and hit people directly in their imagination.
using story to make truth feel real again. It draws on medieval stuff. Magic, good versus evil.
Absolutely. And some sources even suggest playful layers, like linking books to planets Lion Witch, Wardrobe having a Jupiter kingship feel, Dawn Treader resonating with the sun. Whether he intended all that consciously is debated, but the richness is there.
That's fascinating. It shows how stories can carry so much meaning. What about his sci-fi, the space trilogy?
Also brilliant. Out of The Silent Planet, Paralandra, That Hideous Strength, he used science fiction to explore Christian themes, contrasting vibrant, unfallen worlds with a dangerous philosophy he called scientism back on Earth.
Scientism being the idea that science is the only valid way of knowing anything, often leading to a very materialistic, even dehumanizing view.
Exactly. He saw it as a profound threat and used the trilogy to explore its implications, contrasting it with a richer spiritual view of the cosmos. And central to his life during much of this was his membership in the Inklings.
Right, that famous group with Tolkien, Dyson, Charles Williams.
Met regularly, read their work aloud, argued, encouraged each other. His friendship with Tolkien especially was crucial for solidifying his understanding of myth and its connection to the gospel.
Tolkien helped him see myth not just as fantasy, but as a vehicle for truth.
Yes, that myth could be a real, though unfocused gleam of divine truth. He loved how Tolkien's own work seemed to re-enchant the world, finding deep meaning in seemingly ordinary things through mythic resonance.
And then later in life came his marriage to Joy Davidman.
An American writer, also a convert, initially a correspondent. It was unexpected, profound, and brought him great happiness, especially during her remission from her cancer.
But she did eventually die, which must have been shattering.
It was, and out of that grief came A Grief Observed, published under a different name at first.
Because it was so raw and honest about his doubt and anger?
Incredibly so. It's not a neat, tidy account of faith overcoming grief. It's wrestling, questioning, yelling at God. He called it a yell rather than a thought. It showed his commitment to honesty, even when it was painful and didn't fit easy answers.
It really gives permission for people to be honest in their own grief, doesn't it? that faith doesn't mean suppressing doubt.
Absolutely. He later felt a bit appalled at how self-focused his grief seemed in the book, but its honesty remains powerful. He also, influenced by Charles Williams, apparently practiced praying for her suffering to be transferred to him, this idea of substitutionary suffering or co-inherence.
Wow, that's intense. Another recurring theme in Lewis seems to be heaven, immortality.
Very much so. More than many 20th century writers, he emphasized that heaven is the home of humanity. We were made for it. You see it powerfully in Narnia's ending further up and further in to the real Narnia, their true country.
Joy is the serious business of heaven. That's one of his famous lines.
That's the one. Captures his vision perfectly. And in his very last reflections, Letters to Malcolm, written after Joy's death,
Yeah.
he talked about getting beyond religion itself.
How so?
Seeing practices, doctrines as essential maps, tools, but not the destination. The destination is someone, God, who isn't confined to religion, but is everywhere. The world crowded with him, often incognito.
So the real work isn't just religious observance, but
To remember, to attend, to come awake and try to remain awake to that constant hidden in plain sight presence.
that's a powerful final thought from him. So pulling it all together, how did Lewis's life really glorify Jesus? What's the core impact?
I think fundamentally it was his willingness to publicly pivot from deep skepticism to a robust, intellectually defended Christian faith. He made Christianity plausible, understandable, even attractive for millions who might have dismissed it. He used his immense gifts to clear away the clutter and show the real potency, as he might say, of Christian ideas.
Using both reason and imagination as pathways to faith.
Absolutely. He re-enchanted the world for people, showing how story and myth connect to the deepest truths. He demonstrated that faith and intellect aren't enemies.
And his honesty about his own struggles. That must resonate too.
Hugely. His wrestling with pain and doubt in Mile, grief observed, showed that faith isn't blind or easy. It's something you grapple with, honestly.
He also lived out the community aspect through the Inklings and the demanding side of Love and Duty with Mrs. Moore and Joy.
Yes. And his constant focus on heaven, on ultimate joy, provided his anchor of hope in a century often marked by despair.
So for someone listening today, maybe that college-bound student we mentioned, what are the key lessons from Lewis's life?
Well, first off, don't be afraid to use your mind and your imagination when exploring faith. They aren't obstacles. Lewis showed they can be vital tools.
And it's okay to have doubts.
Definitely. Honesty is key.
Yeah.
Wrestle with the tough questions. Don't ignore them. Lewis certainly didn't.
Think about his idea of joy, too. Those deep longings you feel. Are they just random feelings, or could they be pointing towards something real, something more? What are they reminding you of?
Lewis was a master communicator. He shows the value of finding clear, engaging ways to explain what you believe, connecting with people where they are.
And don't dismiss the power of stories, art, myths. As Lewis found, they can open doors to understanding that logic alone might not.
Ultimately, his journey suggests there's something or someone beyond the everyday routine worth paying attention to. His conversion wasn't about obligation. It was about surrendering resistance to being decided upon by that reality.
So reflecting on Lewis's whole arc, the kid dealing with loss, the sharp skeptic, the imaginative convert, the popular writer, the grieving husband, it's an incredible journey, isn't it?
It really is. He managed to weave together intellect, imagination, faith, and lived experience in a way that's still compelling. He dedicated his life to helping others see the Christian story not just as doctrine, but as the ultimate true story.
Challenging that purely materialistic view, arguing that myth helps us recover the rich significance veiled by familiarity.
Yeah, his whole life seemed to demonstrate how the natural and supernatural could be inseparably combined, not walled off from each other.
And bringing it back to his final thought, the real task is to remain awake to God's presence, walking incognito all around us.
Which leaves a great question for you, the listener, to think about. In your own life, with your own challenges and questions, what does it mean for you to remain awake?